Welcome everyone, Christine here with a discussion about the Old World mod for Total War Warhammer 3. And in this particular video, I want to talk about a number of campaigns that I feel this mod improves in a substantial fashion. In the sense that you have campaigns in Immortal Empires that may have good legendary lords for good races, but the problem is that because of the design of the campaign, because of their starting location, the enemies they have to deal with, the terrain they have to tackle, they are limited in their potential. And the campaigns themselves end up suffering significantly because of that, even when you're thinking about powerful legendary lords and or powerful races. So I'll begin with an honorable mention, and I say honorable mention, not on the list itself, but honorable mention Elfarian the Grim. Now, by default, you cannot play Elfarian the Grim in Old World, but if you download the mod configuration tool and you just change a setting there, you can start as Elfarian in Elftown. I would also recommend getting a mod that removes the climate penalties because you're going to be surrounded by a lot of bad climate. So you're using a mod for a mod in order to make this work. But make no mistake, this can work quite very well. Well, one could argue that the Elfarian should be in the Badlands. The benefit of this particular starting position is that you will be going after the big green boy, Grom the Punch, because he's pretty close to you over here. It was always a bit awkward with Elfarian's campaigns, the kind of distance that he would have to cover in order to confront Grom in either Warhammer 2 or Warhammer 3. When in fact the main purpose of his campaign should be about confronting Grom. This is exactly what you're going to be dealing with in this particular campaign. I mean, you don't want to go to war with the Empire. Believe me, that would not necessarily end very well for you. You start next to greenskins, various greenskin factions next to you. You can start your green genocide very early in your campaign over here, starting with this small greenskin faction. It's probably going to be very annoying taking control of this. By the way, MCT allows you to prevent Karl Franz from starting with the entirety of Reichland, though good luck getting control of this particular territory. It's probably not going to be all that doable. However, yeah, this campaign just works very well, especially from the perspective of the rivalry between Elfarian and Grom. Maybe not necessarily the best campaign in the long term, but if you just want to have a campaign as Elfarian, this can work. Another thing I would say I liked about this campaign, I never quite liked Elfarian's campaigns before in Warhammer 2. Like, as a legendary lord, yeah, Elfarian's powerful, but the problem I always had with this campaign is like, you've got another Ulf 1 campaign in Ulf 1, and let me just put it plainly, Tyrion, Alariel, and yes, even Alifanar have always felt better from that particular perspective. It's not that Elfarian is bad, but you've got like this different focus in this campaign that I feel has never really been represented all that well. Like, if you're playing in Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires, of course you want to keep Tor of Rest. Of course you want to fight for Ulfwan. It's the best path in your campaign. That doesn't mean it's the most interesting path. So actually just having a focus for his campaign and not having to deal with that dual start is much better. It's not like Jan Bo, for instance, or some other dual starts that we do have in Warhammer 3. I just never felt it worked quite well, because obviously Wolf 1 gives you an enormous amount of benefits to have. Tor of Rest gives you a significant amount of benefits. Confederating Alariel and Tyrion gives you significant benefits, so you do want those benefits. But really, Elfarian's entire purpose is to go after the green people. And right now, I think you'll be able to go after the green people. And what you do after that, that is a completely different discussion. Don't make no mistake, there are certainly plenty of greenskins in this campaign. Long term, you're probably going to want to deal with Scarbrand once you've dealt with Grom. And then, well, go after Ikit-Claw. Enjoy that particular journey, because oh boy, is that going to be a journey. Not just in distance, but one of the things to mention about Ikit-Claw is like, yeah, he's going to be a lot more difficult to deal with in the old world than he is in either Mortal Empires or Immortal Empires. So that is going to be quite a journey to tackle. Honorable mention, not fully on the list because you have to use a mod for a mod, but still, I do like it. And number 5, it is Teclis of the High Elves. I know back-to-back High Elves over here, but really, Teclis' campaign in Warhammer 2 and Warhammer 3 have never really felt all that great. His starting positions have never been particularly great, and certainly not conducive towards a great campaign. Basically, every other Legendary Lord of the High Elves, including his brother, who was also starting Legendary Lord for the High Elves, have always felt more complete, better designed, with better campaign victory conditions and better campaign dynamics. But things are now different over here in this campaign. One, we get new victory conditions for this particular campaign. So instead of having to deal with the Dark Elves or other nonsense, or dealing with Kairos, Fate Weaver, and yeah, having to invade the Southern Chaos Wastelands from the beginning of your campaign in Immortal Empires is not a great dynamic to deal with. But now we get to deal, well, with the Greenskins and Skarsnik. Well, that is going to certainly be fun. You then have a better and much more interesting campaign dynamic that does get created for Teclis as a result of that. Like, you've got Katep right to the south of you, you've got Volkmar to the north, and you've got Karak Peaks pretty close enough to you. Also, interestingly, is you can now really occupy the wasteland, which does present certain opportunities that didn't exist before. Now, to be certain, if you're playing this campaign, I would strongly recommend using the climate change mod because, well, let's just say the vast majority of the climate that you've got in this campaign is not going to be particularly suitable for you. But a good portion of it, at least in your starting area, is going to be so. And you don't have to waste so much of your early game through the frustration of dealing Kairos, wasting time, and then fighting the Lizardmen, being slowed by the jungle, and entering the Thunderdome in Camry by the time it's basically over. That alone makes this a better campaign. Also, an interesting note about this, he starts at war with this minor Dark Elven faction, which is a bit weird to have Dark Elves and High Elves all the middle in the Badlands, but I guess they both want the Flying Fortress, which is kind of significant in the lore from a magical perspective, so Teclis going for it does make sense. I would say that while Teclis going for something as important as the Flying Fortress, which has been around for a while, I would say that one of the things that has been missing in all of his campaigns is the idea of dealing with the forces of order, because one of the main roles that Teclis has is, well, beyond him manipulating events in the end times that ultimately led to the destruction of the world, Teclis was a significant actor in the Empire and with the forces of order. So I would personally really like for him to actually have a campaign in the Empire dealing with the situation there, helping the Empire, helping the forces of order in their fight against the forces of chaos. We still don't have a campaign of such a nature for Teclis. It does make sense for him to care about the Flying Fortress, but if there was any change I'd like to have with him, like, yeah, Alfarian should probably start in the middle of the Badlands or on the coast of the Badlands, and Teclis should start in Elftown. Or maybe a choice on that, just an example, from my perspective. But overall, much better campaign dynamic, better starting position, much more interesting campaign to deal with over here than anything we've dealt with Teclis in his campaigns in either Warhammer 2 or 3, from my point of view. And number 4 is Louen Leoncoeur of Bretonnia. Now, Louen has always been a pretty strong Legendary Lord. Good combat ability, pretty decent skill line, good faction effects when we're looking at it with that campaign movement range. Okay, that's great. The problem that's always existed for Louen Leoncoeur, in Warhammer 3 at least, is the fact that his starting situation was pretty complicated. Like, Be'lakor would attack you endlessly, he would march across the ocean, and you'd also have the Norskins harassing you. Meanwhile, what you really wanted to do in your campaign is conquer down south. So that created a pretty awful campaign dynamic that you had to deal with. Also, because of the vow system that Bretonnia has, Louen was actually going to struggle quite significantly in terms of being able to unlock a lot of vows for his characters. That dynamic has been improved. The vow that you generally struggle with is the second one or the second Throt. But now Bretonnia is, well, pretty significant. A pretty significant part of the campaign map, and guess what? You've got a bunch of greenskins to deal with. Like, you always had these greenskins, but let me just say, Dealing with Rom when he basically is going to take a province with 3 settlements in it, and then obviously his Skull Smashers does certainly change the dynamic completely. And also not having to march on Musulon from the very first few turns of your campaign is also a vast improvement, because guess what? That place is heavily fortified and it is quite a bloody nuisance to deal with. It was certainly a playable campaign, but I vastly preferred playing every other Bretonnian campaign as opposed to Louen. Now, however, with the changes that are made in Bretonnia, you can actually play and enjoy Louen significantly more than you did before. I would probably recommend Auto Vow Complete mod, so that you get vows completed when lords and heroes reach a certain level. That will certainly improve the dynamic, but just the campaign starting position alone, and the fact that now Bretonnia is a pretty substantial province, like Karun is a pretty substantial province with 4 settlements, does vastly improve the situation that Louen does have. Also, I have to say, like, actually starting with the Sables as opposed to starting with a useless barracks of Bretonnia is in itself a significant improvement in every Bretonnian campaign. Honestly, I would prefer if they started with fields as well, because yeah, you may want to recruit archers. Tier 1 is not necessarily too important, but it does allow you to be able to easily get Knights Errant to tier 2 and your first Paladin, and then obviously lead up towards tier 3. So there's a lot to like about it. Also, I have to say, like, Karun genuinely feels like a worthwhile province now for Bretonnia. It didn't quite feel like that before in Immortal Empires, but certainly in the old world, it's a great province. It has a lot on offer. The economy you're going to generate with this province alone will set you up in your campaign. So a lot of fun, just from the fact you're not constantly being invaded by Be'lakor and his Norskins, and also Wulfric that might be coming in, and other factions as well. You can expand, you can build up, and you can become incredibly powerful. Like, having a lot of enemies to deal with from the beginning of a campaign can work and can be an interesting campaign, but it doesn't work when they're invading you via the sea through a territory that you really couldn't care less about early on. And the problem was, like, Bretonnia and Immortal Empires has a lot of provinces of just 2 settlements each, so enjoy dealing with a lot of those awful sieges, whereas Bretonnia in Old World is far more spread out. There's a lot of settlements in a lot of these provinces, far more spread out, so less sieges, less annoyance to deal with during the course of your campaign. I like it. I vastly prefer this version of Bretonnia than the one we got in Immortal Empires. Honestly, every Bretonnian campaign, with the exception of Ponce, who I felt had a pretty solid campaign in Immortal Empires, though you still wanted to make your way back to Bretonnia, but I do feel like every Bretonnian campaign has benefited to the changes to Bretonnia in itself. And number 3, we have Throt the Unclean of the Skaven. Throt has always been a pretty awesome character with interesting campaign mechanics, but the problem has always been for him that his starting position, well, never was that great when we're talking about Immortal Empires, because Kislev is just not that great in Immortal Empires to take, especially for the Skaven, because the Skaven do want to take over a lot of provinces relatively quickly with multiple settlements in them, more than 2 at the very least, to make the economic output go. And Throt himself does want to fight a good amount of battles to get his growth juice. Oh yes, we're gonna go for that. Now, however, I think Tank will pay the visit to help it, and basically Throt is the last Skaven standing and help it, because that's the only explanation I can make for it. So yeah, Tank will really fuck this one up, I imagine. It is hilarious. So you start in the 9th circle of hell. Like, it is kind of hilarious. Like, the Slaneshi, though I would probably put the Slaneshi more so on the 8th circle and 7th circle personally, because yeah, the Sinnelleos probably deserve their place over there, but outside of that, like, just having Hell Pit with the Demons of Chaos and with the Skaven at the very bottom feels so damn appropriate. It is just hilarious. While these settlements are not necessarily worth it all that much, because there's only one build slot in these elements, it is so funny and so amusing that you have to love it, like what's done here. And once you move past that, like once you conquer all of Hell Pit, you'll get a very strong defensible position that only armies that have the Underway can actually use to attack. good luck with that, because while there are certainly dwarves, they might be struggling a bit to be able to, do it. Though I'm guessing Chaos Robin decided to split Karak a bit because, yeah, they might have been a bit too powerful with all the territory that they controlled. All the same, though, you do have to like what's been done and help it. Like, it is an amazing area of the campaign map. Like, it is fun. It is an incredibly strong defensible position, and good luck taking all of the circles of hell, because it is certainly going to be a march against the forces of Hell Pit. And once you move past that, like, you do have a good amount of options over here in Kislev, because, yeah, the Kislev provinces certainly are actually good. Sure, there's still some provinces with only 2 settlements, but a lot of them are, like, 3-4 settlements, so this is incredibly powerful. Also, this is also great for Kislev, absolutely, but Kislev is still Kislev. However, for Throt, yeah, it's great. It is a great campaign dynamic that does make his campaign worth playing significantly more, because it's frustrating being limited by the terrain of the campaign even when you're playing a fun and powerful legendary lord, which Throt certainly does qualify as. So lots to enjoy over here, and yes, Castalten and Catherine did also improve from this. Isaac, I'm kind of two minds. I mean, he's probably just going to steamroll the entirety of Kislev, and, well, no one's going to be able to stop him, I think. But regardless, Throt the Unclean, absolutely worth playing, much improved campaign from my perspective compared to Immortal Empires. And number 2, it would be Belegar, though just as equally you could put Skarsnik, you could put Queek in this particular position. But I would have to say Belegar. Belegar's campaign, ever since it was introduced, never really captured the feeling of the War of 8 Peaks. In fact, in Warhammer 1, 2, and 3, we've never really gotten a campaign situation where you really had the War of Karak 8 Peaks. Now you do have the War of Karak 8 Peaks. You have these territories that are well worth capturing, so it's not like you're just doing it for the sake of objectives, whereas either Quake, Skarsnik, or Belegar, but rather you're doing it because there's some incredibly powerful landmarks, and you might even join this war if you're playing another faction, because Raza, for instance, starts close enough to this location that he could potentially join in the War of Karak 8 Peaks. But yes, Belegar is the main beneficiary of this, especially given his Immortal Empire situation. Basically, if you're playing a Belegar campaign, it would be about 20 turns of pure misery because of the upkeep situation, then things would improve after that. If you're playing Queek or Skarsnik, things would be significantly better, but again, you never really felt you were fighting for 8 peaks, because making 8 peaks just one single settlement in a province, regardless of how many settlements were in that province, just kind of neutered the importance of it, because you would just go in, you would capture it, and, well, good luck having the AI kick you out of it. And the AI of the other 2 factions that would also be potentially aiming for 8 peaks would rarely, if ever, honestly, go for 8 peaks. Powerful landmarks, all the legendary lords involved in Karak 8 peaks, very close to it. And yes, I do believe Belegar genuinely benefits the most from this situation, though he could really use a different starting settlement in the Blood River Valley, because as things stand right now, obviously as Belegar, going into Karak 8 Peaks as quickly as possible is useful, so you're not really going to bother with your initial province. And also, you really don't want to let Skarsnik get out of control. I've fought this war in the old world. Skarsnik will have 4 armies if you don't stop him. And this applies, by the way, to Quick Taker. Like, if you just want Skarsnik to get out of control, start recruiting masses of heroes and higher ranked units, go ahead. Hell, even worse, if Skarsnik actually starts recruiting orcs, because he might just be able to if you let him, as opposed to just having him use goblins. Like, the AI is pretty bad with nasty skulkers and using them in battle, whereas under, like, orc units, giving Skarsnik big guns, or maybe even worse black orcs, would be pretty devastating. But regardless, Karak 8 Peaks, in particular Belegar, is significantly better in the old world mod. Like, it's actually the only time that we've actually had the War for Karak 8 Peaks properly realized. And finally, at number 1, it would be Ikit-Claw. While certainly I am a big fan of Belegar and the War of Karak 8 Peaks that the Old World does do, I really have to add Ikit-Claw to the number 1 position. Now, people might be wondering about this. Well, I'm gonna say it outright. I've never felt that the Ikit-Claw campaign was really all that great, especially in Warhammer 2, or even Immortal Empires. The reason behind that is not that I feel that Ikit-Claw is not a good lord. He certainly is. The nuclear weapons alone, regardless of anything else, would certainly elevate them to that position. But here's the thing. Skaven Blight in either Warhammer 2 or Warhammer 3 is in this bad position where you can't really fully utilize it. Expanding around Skaven Blight, well, enjoy dealing with Lorem from like the first 10 turns of your campaign as if you do that. So you end up in this pretty awful campaign situation. You can do it, but it's kind of pure misery to deal with the elves, especially because of the maps that you might have in Lorem that nullify the power of your gunpowder units. But then you look at Skaven Blight and the Old World mod, and it's like, ooh, we're in a good, strong, powerful starting position, multiple Skaven factions surrounding us. I cannot stress how incredibly potent Ikit-Claw is in this particular campaign, as opposed to all the other campaigns that he's ever had. Maybe like the Vortex campaign, but even then, I don't think that holds a candle to the sheer power of it. So you get Skaven Blight with all of its building slots that it had before, and you get multiple settlements to Skaven Blight, and you no longer have to deal with major factions surrounding you. So you don't have the Wood Elves just beelining it for you. You don't have to deal with Mogr, Arnessa, Fey Enchantress. Sure, she's still close enough to you, but she's not quite the same nuisance when you're being ganked up by multiple lords. I don't care how powerful a Legendary Lord is when you have to deal with that. And even worse, the problem in Ikit-Claw's campaign in Warhammer 3 really lies in the fact that it's not just like, oh, you have a lot of lords around you. No, you defeat one, you encounter another one. Now, some campaigns can do this well. Like Alefanar, I feel, does this dynamic well. For Ikit-Claw, especially, the problem with starting near Lorem is like Lorem for the vast majority of factions is not great territory to take. And in particular for a Skaven, it's not great territory to take. Because Skaven want territories with multiple settlements in a province to really make the economic output of those provinces work. So yeah, Lorem is practically useless for the Skaven, beyond the climate situation. But now, you've got Skaven Blight, you've got the entire province, you've got Tylea and Estalia just being ready to be gobbled up by the Skaven. You have a Skaven clan directly to your west with whom you can be good friends with. I mean, the only threat, so to speak, that you have in this entire campaign is that Forik might potentially be coming for you relatively early, at least if you expand towards him. And Forik is genuinely scary to deal in a campaign, but here, there's not such a threat. Like here outside that particular threat, you don't have quite the same situation like what would happen with Belegar, the Wood Elves, and all those other factions. And on top of that, you got Deathmaster Snitch close enough to you, so you get a campaign dynamic where you have 2 of the most powerful Legendary Lords, so out of 3 of the most powerful Legendary Lords for the Skaven, Throt being the third, 2 out of 3 of the most powerful Legendary Lords of the Skaven in close proximity to one another, being able to confederate one another. Now, Snitch already had a pretty good campaign, don't get me wrong, his campaign is pretty solid over here, but his campaign was pretty good in Warhammer 3 beforehand. However, Ikit-Claw's campaign, like, yeah, now it's fun, now it's interesting, now it creates a much, much better campaign dynamic for a Skaven Lord that I never felt you could really realize his full potential unless you dealt with the annoying, insufferable grind of those first 20, 30 turns. Like, I've done Ikit-Claw campaigns in Warhammer 3. I've made it work. Like, the problem with his campaign dynamic is it lowers the replayability, right? It's not just like, oh, it's awful once and you deal with it and then you move on and have a proper campaign. No, it's just like, you don't want to replay it. That's my problem with it. Whereas here, yeah, I do want to replay it. It does look fun. Actually, a lot of the times with the old world, like I want to play so many campaigns in this particular mod. Though we'll see how things shape up in the future and which other lords might be added and what other terrain changes. Costin here signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more. Also, just to add, the latest patch did break the mod, but that's fine, you know? I'm fine if Creative Assembly is fixing things. It's better than waiting for months for any kind of fixes to come into the game.